Hello, Anne. Are you there? How are you?
I'm fine, thank you, and you?
I'm doing good. Thanks for asking. All right. So, what have you done so far? What do you have, Mikhail Kalashnikov?
Uh,
What? Where can you find that name?
it's guys, it's,
Is it
a maker. This is a
Ru
maker.
Russian inventor, right?
Yes, AK for 47.
1947. AK-47. Ah, I see. The one who made the deadliest, he knows to be the deadliest inventor because he made weapons for the Russia.
Yes,
AK-47. I see. And do you have liking with guns? Do you like guns?
yes. But in Vietnam we can't use gun, so I
Mm-hmm.
explore about again
Mm-hmm.
on the phone.
Oh, I see, I see. It's right. Do you want to be in military in the future? Do you want to be part of the army when you grow up?
No,
Do you
no,
understand? Do you want to be part of the army?
no.
No, no. You just like guns and the topic of wars like that? Is that correct?
Yes.
Oh, I see. We're going to watch one video about World War One. Do you know how it started?
Um, um, Germany is the leader of Germany is Wilhelm the second Wilhelm. He
Wilhelm.
went to um,
You wanted to.
um, um, he went to a European unification to have a
Mm-hmm.
big powerful,
Mm-hmm.
but um, he's alone, so he went to Hungary with um,
Mm-hmm.
um, Hungary with um, um, is Hungary and
Mm-hmm.
um, I don't know.
Okay. For that, maybe would you mind if we're going to watch a short video about World War One, how it started? Would you mind? Is it okay? Let's
Okay.
try. We're going to listen. Okay. Let me share my screen. See my screen? Do you see my screen?
Yes, I see.
Okay. Let's start.
Hi, I'm John Green. This
Can you
is
hear it?
Crash Course World History, and today we're going to talk about World War One.
Can you hear it?
Yes.
Okay. So we're going to talk about World War One and how it started. Okay.
have 2 videos about World War I. Today we're going to talk about how World War I happened. Next week we're going to talk about why. World War I is a really big deal, especially to those of us who are really interested in like industrialization and nation states and modernity, so usually we don't.
Okay. Did you understand what he's saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you tell me what did he say? How the World War I being concerned to industrialization and modernization? Can you say the words?
Initiation.
Industrialization and modernization. Okay, if we're going to look, yeah. So this is the meaning. Industrialization.
Industrialization.
Or sorry, lialization. Can you say it again? Industrialization. Industrialization.
Industrialization.
Industrialization.
Lialization. Industrialization. Again?
Industrialization.
Industrialization.
Okay. Industrialization.
Okay. Industrialization. Industrialization.
Industrialization.
Industrialization.
Lialization. Industrialization. Industrialization. Can you say it?
Yes.
In-
Industrialization.
Okay, so try here. Industrialization. Industrialization. Okay, again.
Industrialization.
Okay, good. And in Vietnamese,
Công nghiệp hóa.
okay, industrialization, and the other one is modernity.
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 Okay, modernity. Okay, good. So World War I is all about this one. Okay, do you understand?
Okay.
Okay, we continue. Well, oh, before that, do you know what is this thing called?
This this is Japan.
Yes. This is Japan, the Russia, the China, Vietnam, the Philippines here. But but what do you call to this thing? The one that you can rotate. What do you call that? You call it globe.
No.
Globe.
Okay?
Okay.
You call it globe. All right?
Okay.
Okay, we continue.
Talk that much about wars, but we're gonna make an exception. Mr. Green, exception? Cue the Mongoltage. Yeah, no, me from the past. We don't.
You know Mazel Tov?
Yes.
Okay.
There was lost in Vietnam 3 times.
Oh, I see. Mongol Dodge.
Roll the Mongoltage every time we use the word exception. We roll it when we're talking about how the Mongols are an exception to a lot of our assumptions about civilizations. Stan, no, there are no Mongols today. We are talking about World War I.
Okay, we're going to talk about World War I. Okay?
So I'm filming this in 2014, which means that the Great War started 100 years ago, and the World War I centenary is just so hot right now, I can't miss out on it. So most historians agree that the event that started World War I was the assassination of Austrian Archduke Franz Ferdinand on June 20.
Okay. Can you read that part? Well,
Um,
most historians agree. Can you read that part?
so much historians that
Historians.
historians that the event that started World War I was the assassination of National
Of
Archduke
Austrian
of Austrian
Archduke
Duke Franz Ferdinand
Ferdinand.
Ferdinand
Mhm.
on June
June 28.
June 28 in
1914.
1914. But beyond that, there's not a
There's
lot
a
of
lot, there's not a lot of agreement.
but there's not a lot of argument.
Okay, so do you understand? Most historians agree that World War One started because this person, okay, Franz Ferdinand, Franz Ferdinand was killed. Okay, you know assassination?
Yes,
Okay. Assassination.
Assassination. Sự ám sát.
Okay, so meaning killed, right? Killed.
yes. He was killed by a gun, and
Mm-hmm.
some wise from I don't know his from because it's
Mm-hmm.
very secret, but Australian say it's from
Austrian,
Siberia. Yes,
Austria,
Australian say it's from Siberia.
Siberia. Okay, which is part of Soviet Union, right? Or Russia now. Okay, we continue. All right, we can continue.
28th, 1914. But beyond that, there's not a lot of agreement. Others say the war really started after Franz Ferdinand bid it, like when Germany declared
Okay, so like when Germany declared a war on when Russia mobilized.
war or when Russia mobilized. So looking at why a war or any historical event happened means looking for a cause and effect relationship. That implicitly assumes that if one particular event in a chain of events had gone differently, the historical outcome would also be different. This is why we have alternate history novels, right? Like what would have happened in the American Civil War if the South had won the battle at Gettysburg? What would have happened if the Nazis had repulsed the D-Day invasion? In both cases, probably eventually the same outcome. But that's neither here nor there. The question we're looking at today is how, and that's a much more modest question because we can simply discuss a series of events, but it's still a complicated one. Because when you're talking about how, you're always picking from an uncountable number of things that happen. You know, a butterfly flaps its wings and that leads to a series of events, and then eventually across the world an archduke gets killed. So even when it comes to a relatively straightforward question like how, you'll never get to the bottom of all of it, but today we're going to discuss some of the how. So one way or another, all wars start with a breakdown in peaceful relations between the eventual belligerents. And
Okay, do you know the word belligerents? Belligerents.
Belligerence.
Lòng hiếu chiến.
Can you pronounce the word? Belligerents.
Belligerents.
Okay.
Belligerence.
Okay, can you see it? Belligerents.
Belligerents.
Okay, so if you are belligerent,
Belligerent.
meaning you are aggressive. Okay?
Hiếu chiến.
Okay? Do you understand the word now?
Yes.
Okay, belligerent. Aggressive. So between the eventual belligerents and World War One is no exception. Can we continue?
Okay.
All right.
World War I is no exception. Oh, for the love of agriculture, please stop it. Right, but World War I is a bit unusual in that we have a concrete event and a date to start our discussion. Sometimes we get lucky, historically, and there's an invasion that starts a war, like in the Korean conflict, or the firing on Fort Sumter in the American Civil War. But other times it's much more butterfly effecty, with events that might or might not lead to a war building upon each other until one side mobilizes or declares war, or there's a fight over who shot first. But here we have a specific assassination of a specific Archduke, Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo. Now, it wasn't a great day for Franz to visit Bosnia, since it was the anniversary of the Serbs' defeat at Kosovo-Polja in 1389, and also St. Vitus's Day, which was a celebration for Slavic nationalists, and a Bosnian Serb named Gavrilo Princip and his co-conspirators chose to celebrate Slavic nationalism by killing Franz Ferdinand. Now, they didn't choose Franz Ferdinand at random. He was the heir apparent of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Franz Ferdinand wasn't particularly well liked, not by his uncle, who was the head of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, certainly not by Bosnian Serb nationalists, also not really by everyone else in Europe, except for the German Kaiser. But Franz Ferdinand was, in his way, kind of a moderate. Oh, it's time for the open letter? Oh, look, it's a collection of my favorite assassinated moderates. It's hard out there for a moderate. An open letter to moderates. Dear moderates, so one of the reasons that Franz Ferdinand's uncle didn't like him that much is that the emperor was really hardcore, whereas Franz Ferdinand, he was kind of a moderate. He was like, I'm an Austro-Hungarian through and through, but I see the Serbian argument. Really, Franz Ferdinand was the one leader in the empire who might have come up with a solution to the problems of Serbian expansion and Bosnian independence. And murdering moderates has a way of making other moderates, more extreme. In short, moderates, your work may not be romantic, it may not appeal to the youth, but it is heroic and very dangerous. Best wishes, John Green. So even though Franz Ferdinand's uncle didn't particularly like him, as the Emperor of Austria-Hungary, he felt a certain responsibility to, do something. Otherwise, the Serbian nationalists would feel like they could expand their territory at the expense of the empire. So despite what you often hear about World War I being pointless, this makes sense as a point, sort of. Now, it's a bit of schoolyard bully kind of diplomacy, but it does make a certain sense. If Serbia can get bigger, then all of the other places will think that they can have nations too. Soon enough, you don't have an empire. Now, there's still some debate about whether Princip and his fellow assassins acted alone or as part of a larger conspiracy organized by the Serbian government. But the Austrian...
Okay, so there are a lot of things happen. Did you follow? Did you follow?
Yes.
Can you follow? Do you find it fast?
Yes.
Do you find it fast? Do you understand or not so much?
Yes, I understand.
Okay, you can understand. Okay. Let's try to look into, okay, still?
Certainly thought there was broader involvement, which is why the whole thing ended up becoming a war. So Princip was a member of the scary-sounding Black Hand, a group dedicated to creating a greater Serbia that would include Bosnia. And there's some evidence that the Serbian chief of military intelligence was in on the assassination plot, or at least knew about it. In fact, it's likely that the bombs and pistols the assassins used were supplied by a Serbian army officer, but this is still pretty controversial, so much so that people are currently fighting about it in comments. So almost a month after the assassination, on July 23rd, Austria issued an ultimatum to Serbia. And Austria intentionally made the demands so harsh that the Serbs would inevitably have to reject them, and ergo war, but that doesn't explain the month-long delay. What happened in that month? Well, Austria's foreign minister, Berchtold, was afraid that if they attacked...
Berchtold. Remember Berchtold? Foreign minister was afraid if they attack Serbia, Russia would then attack Austria-Hungary. Bertoldo. You remember the name Bertold? Where can you remember the name?
No.
Bertold.
Bertold.
Yeah? Where can you remember the name? Remember Attack on Titan?
Yes.
Is it almost the same name? Isn't it the same, almost the same name? Well, this one is Berchtold, but the other one is Bertold, right? Bertold. Yeah. So, look, this one, afraid. Afraid. Was Bertold afraid in Attack of Titans? Attack on Titans?
It's yeah, it's Odema.
Sorry, what is?
Odem.
What's the word? Oh, sorry. Let me check. ODM. Ah, yeah. Yeah, the one with ODM. Why?
It's men weapon or Odema for Titan for human.
Sorry. What is it again?
Odema used to kill Titan, not for kill humans.
Yes. They're using ODM. I see. So, of course, Serbia is almost part of Russia, right? So that's why this one is a little afraid to attack Serbia, right? So we continue.
Serbia, Russia would then attack Austria-Hungary, so the Austrians spent that month talking to their ally Germany to make sure the Germans would have Austria's back. The Austro-Hungarians got assurance on July 5th or July 6th in the form of what has been called the blank check, a promise from Germany that they would help Austria if Russia mobilized. And it was clear that the Germans expected the Austrians to move quickly in response to the assassination, not like wait for another 20 days. So usually I don't care about dates, but at this point the timing becomes pretty important. Let's go to the thought bubble. So when the Serbs received the Austrian ultimatum, Russia declared itself to be in a period preparatory to war, which sounds a lot like mobilization, but technically it wasn't, which Russia's foreign minister emphasized to the Germans. The Tsar approved the measure on July 25th, and it went into effect on July 26th. The Serbs rejected Austria's ultimatum on July 25th, but they made their rejection sound like a capitulation, so the Germans thought that war had been averted, and they were kind of surprised then on July 28th when Austria suddenly declared war on Serbia, even though the Austrian army wasn't actually ready to start fighting. Then, on July 30th, Russia exited its period preparatory to war and actually officially mobilized. Germany warned the Russians to stand down, but 2 days later, on August 1st, France mobilized its armed forces in support of Russia, and that same day, Germany mobilized and declared war on Russia. So if you're keeping score at home, and good historians always do, Austria and Germany were the first to declare war on July 28th and August 1st, respectively, but Russia, with its pre-mobilization mobilization, was actually ready to begin fighting before Serbia rejected Austria's ultimatum. Anyway, then Germany declared war on France on August 3rd, marched through Belgium to invade, hoping to quickly knock out the French and focus on Russia. Sorry, France, but, you know, Russia's a big deal, and you know. German troops crossed Belgium's border on August 4th, and the British issued an ultimatum to the Germans, telling them to get out of Belgium or else. Germany chose or else, and Britain declared war. So by August 4th, 1914, all the major powers involved in World War I were officially at war with each other. Thanks, Thought Bubble. Now, I know there were a lot of other powers that...
Okay, do you understand what happened?
The Allies have leaflet for German armies, but they want to peace, but Germany say continue the war.
Yes. So even they said they don't want to continue the war started, right?
would get involved later, including the United States and Japan and the Ottoman Empire, even Italy. But for the nations who did most of the actual fighting, Germany, Austria-Hungary, Russia, Serbia, France, Great Britain, the war happened both very quickly and very slowly. Now, looking back, it all happened almost at once, but if you're in the middle of it, a month is a long time. And at any point, someone, like, say, the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, could have come in and said, wait a second. Well, I guess not anyone, because he was dead. But that's how an act of terrorism in a Bosnian city turned into the first major European war of the 20th century, a war that still resonates today. Now, the Austrians and the Serbs probably both imagined that the war could stay localized to the Balkans, especially since there had been previous conflicts in the region that hadn't blown up into a world war. You know, like in 1908, and 1912, and 1913. We'll get into what made 1914 different next week. The whys, of course, will always be very complicated, but for now, please remember that we are always in the middle of a how. Those living in June and July of 1914 could never have imagined how significant that month would be for human history. And when thinking about them, it's worth remembering that we also can't imagine what our decisions today will mean in 100 years. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week. Crash Course is filmed here in the chat, and Stacy Emmigholtz.
So that's the part. Okay, let's try to look on the part 2.
Hi, I'm John Green. This
Okay.
is
So we understand how it started. Of course, how it started because the Archduke of Austria has been killed, right? Franz Ferdinand. And now let's try to look who started or why it started. Okay? Let's try to look into it.
Crash Course World History, and today we continue our discussion of how a regional conflict became World War I. We're also going to look at who started the war, and although no one nation is truly to blame, some nations are more to blame than others. Like America, for once, blameless. Well, not totally blameless, largely blameless. Mr. Green, that's easy. The Germans started the war. Well, from the past, as it happens, many historians and British politicians would agree with you. I mean, you have an opinion that can be defended, and I can't wait for you to defend it. Maybe they just, like, really liked war. I'm not really in the defending positions business, Mr. Green. I'm more in the bold proclamations business. Yes, me from the past noted. But it turns out there's more to life than that.
Okay. Crash course.
So the topic of who started World War I remains one of the most controversial and interesting topics to discuss in world history, not least because, we'd like to avoid having another one. But in general, when we talk about world wars, as when we talk about World Cups, we pretty quickly end up discussing Germany. The idea that the root cause of World War I was Germany, or more specifically German militarism, continues to be popular. This has been the case ever since the 1960s, when this historian, Fischer.
Okay, can you read the name? Fritz Fischer.
Fischer.
Okay. So this is the historian Fritz Fischer identified Germany as the chief cause of the war. Okay, do you believe that the Germany started the war? Do you believe that the Germany started the war? What do you think?
It's not Germany only. I think we have Australia, Hungarian and
Austria-Hungary, like that. Austria-Hungarian, and also Italy. I see. And meaning to say that it's not only Germany. You want to put Austria-Hungary as well as Italy together that started the war? Okay. What about Russia being so prepared to have a war?
They in
They
the beginning of the fight. It's a World War. Russia was have superior and allies to attack the Germany, Australia, and Hungarians.
Yes.
In 22, but after that, in 1917, the October Russian Revolution, led by Lenin, has been started.
Okay, so Lenin will start to mobilize. Okay. Oh, I see. I see. Right. So we can try to continue. Okay.
Identified Germany as the chief cause of the war. But Germany's guilt for the war was also written into the Versailles Peace Treaty in Article 231. And
okay, let's try to read this one quickly. Can you read this one again? But Germany's guilt for the war was also written on Versailles Peace Treaty in Article 231. Can you read again?
But Germany's guilt for the war was also written into Versailles Peace Treaty in
Peace Treaty.
Peace Treaty in
Article 231.
Article 231.
Okay, do you know what is Versailles Peace Treaty?
Yes, it's a treaty in Versailles.
Versailles is in France, right?
Yes.
Okay. If we're going to look into this one,
it's what is big debt for Germany for 14, the Germany has been paid all debt for the LA.
Okay. So it says here actually the signed treaty here in Versailles is that it made the Germany uh, admit the guilt. They have to admit the guilt. Do you know the term guilt?
Guilt.
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 tội lỗi,
Guilt. Okay,
Guilt.
guilt means the fact of having committed or committed a specified or implied offense or crime. So guilt. So they admitted the guilt. Germans admitted the guilt.
Germans admitted the guilt.
Okay, that they started World War One, and they will do something about it. That they have to reconcile and help other nations to rebuild. Do you remember? Right. So we continue, right?
231. And most of you will be familiar with the idea that anger over that clause and its incumbent debts helped lead to Hitler's rise. Also, pretty much however you slice it, Germany was definitely responsible for starting World War II. And looking back, that made it more plausible that they would also have started World War I because, you know, they had a history of starting wars. To be fair, the definition of a Western European nation is has a history starting wars. Unless you're the Swiss. Cue the Switzer reel, Stan.
Okay, why Switzerland is a little important here? Because Switzerland,
Is,
do you know Switzerland? You know what is Switzerland?
yes, it's a natural country.
Okay, it's a country, right? But did Switzerland participated the war?
No, they
No,
don't.
they don't, right? So they are very peaceful, right? So they did not they did not engage in any war, right? So that's why it's peaceful. Okay, continue.
Yeah, okay, but the thing is, attributing characteristics like militarism or authoritarianism to entire national populations is a little problematic. Also, one nation's militarism is another nation's strong national defense, and when you live in the country, as I do, that spends more on defense than any other nation, it's probably not that good of an idea to call people militaristic. There's just something about that broad brush painting of an entire nation sharing a particular characteristic that feels a little bit propaganda-y. Also, it wasn't just Germans who were militaristic in 1914. The idea of the glory of war was a very popular concept all over Europe. And really, there's no evidence that the German people of 1914 were any more or less militaristic than the French or the Russians. They all had poetry that celebrated heroic sacrifice and dying for the mother and or fatherland. It's not usually and. Maybe, though. I'm going to stay open-minded. But there's another problem with the whole idea that the Germans were more eager for war than anyone else in Europe. That argument relies a lot on the behavior of Kaiser Wilhelm II, the German...
Okay, do you know this person, right? Kaiser Wilhelm II.
Yes.
Okay, can you read this one? That the argument relies.
That argument relies a lot of the behavior of Kaiser Wilhelm
Wilhelm.
II.
You read this one,
Wilhelm.
Wilhelm, because in German, letter W pronounces letter V. Wilhelm,
Wilhelm
the second.
II.
The second. So
The
you read it,
second.
Kaiser Wilhelm II.
Kaiser Wilhelm II, the
Yes.
German leader, and the Kaiser did make some
It makes some bellicose.
did
Okay.
make some bloody bellicose activity.
Okay. Bellicose.
Bellicose.
Okay. Demonstrating aggression and willingness to fight. So so what is the word again?
Bellicose.
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 Okay. So before we have the term belligerent.
Delicious.
Belligerent.
Bellicose.
Bellicose.
All right. And continue.
As to be police statements.
Okay.
leader, and the Kaiser did make some pretty bellicose and stupid public statements, which in turn made people fear that Germans were eager for war. So Wilhelm became kind of a stand-in for German aggression, a literal cartoon villain upon whom the world, especially the English, could project their stereotypes. So I would argue that the German character isn't to blame for World War I, and in fact, no national character has ever been to blame for any war. But I am not going to let the Germans off the hook entirely. So you'll remember that Germany offered the so-called blank check that Germans would always support Austro-Hungarian's ultimatum to Serbia. And in some ways, this empowering by Germany's support encouraged Austria's foreign minister Bechtold to behave as recklessly as possible under the mistaken impression that this is what the Germans wanted him to do. So basically, Austria thought that Germany wanted a war, so they were like, oh, we'll just behave really recklessly and we'll give the Germans the war they've been so excited about. But the Germans were offering the Austrians the assurance of support in the hopes that it wouldn't lead to war. So you could argue that in fact most of the blame for starting World War I should fall on the shoulders of the Austrians.
Okay, so do you understand what happened? What is the word here? That most people thought that it's the Germany that started the war. But the blank check, do you understand the blank check? Like an assurance. Do you know the word assurance? Assurance.
Assurance.
Can you read the word assurance?
Assurance.
Okay, for the word assurance here, Austria thought they had the assurance that Germany will always help them, right? And Berchtold, the prime minister of Austria, went for the war because they thought they had the assurance. And they said that, okay, let's go for the war since Germany is very excited about it, very eager about it, right? But they said that it's not really eager. They will support not to lead the war, okay? They will support the Austria not to attack the nation, right? Do you understand?
Okay.
Okay. Any questions so far?
No.
Okay, you understand so far, right? So we use subtitles because the person talks so fast, right?
Okay.
Okay, continue.
After all, they were the ones who issued the ultimatum to Serbia, and they were the first to declare war, although only against Serbia. But the Germans were the first to declare war on a major power, Russia, on August 1st, and the German advance on France through Belgium is what brought...
Okay, can you read that one?
But Germans were the first to
Declare war on a major power,
on a major power, Russian
Russia,
and Russia on August
first.
first, and the German advance on Pantado. The German is
What brought
into
Britain?
war.
Okay, so Belgium is what brought Britain to the war, into the war.
Brought Britain into the war. And those are pretty solid arguments that Germany turned the conflict from, a regional thing in the Balkans, which isn't unprecedented, to like this big pan-European war. But I don't think we're done assigning blame, because we didn't just have a pan-European war, we had a world war. Russia. Now you'll remember that of all the major powers, Russia was the first to mobilize its massive army, and it was Russia's mobilization that drew Germany, France, and Britain into the war. Putin is looking at me, isn't he, Stan? I am just trying to you're so scary. Stan, can you please make Mr. Putin go away? I'm just trying to talk about history. I'm not talking about any current conflicts. And it makes me nervous to say this, but there was really no good reason for Russia to mobilize in the first place. I mean, when Austria declared war on Serbia on July 28th, the Austrians could not mobilize their own troops for 2 weeks because they were on harvest break. I mean, if we've learned anything about agriculture, it's that it's hard to have a large-scale war without it, so we can't go to war until all the wheat has been farmed. But even if Austria had mobilized and attacked immediately, their initial plan was an attack on Belgrade, not Russia, which, by the way, was called somewhat confusingly Plan B. Now, Vienna did have a plan to mobilize against both Serbia and Russia, but they never used it. But even if Austria had launched an all-out attack on Russia, Russia had begun its pre-mobilization, the period preparatory to war, on July 25th. And while I usually don't care about dates, with the start of World War I, very important, because July 25th was before the Serbs had even responded to the Austrian ultimatum. And just as a general rule, it's hard to play the blameless victim when you're moving all of your troops to the border. Hey, why are you here again, Putin? So here we have Austrians and Germans receiving reports of Russian troops massing on their borders, and that seems kind of like war. A lot of it comes down to how you understand Russia's period preparatory to war. I mean, do you focus on the period preparatory, or do you focus on the to war? Regardless, on July 30th, Russia became the first power to actually put its war machine into motion. Let's go to the thought bubble. So talking about Russia
War
leads us towards some of the
machine.
more meta arguments about the causes of World War I, because it's difficult to understand what Russia was doing when it mobilized without trying to understand why they mobilized. After all, an Austrian attack on Serbia was hardly an existential threat to Russia. I mean, look at the map. Russia's huge, and at the time probably had the largest army in Europe, if not the world. So why would they care about what was likely to be a skirmish on the Bosnian border? Well, here's where geopolitics and history come in. So looking at the map, you can see that the Balkans are right next to the Dardanelles, the straits that give access to the Black Sea. Russia needed to maintain influence there in order to ensure traffic through those straits, especially if the Ottomans were going to form an alliance with the Germans, which they did. Also, at least in its own estimation, Russia was in danger of becoming a laughingstock in European politics. Their humiliating loss to Japan in the Russo-Japanese War was followed by Russia's inability to stop Austria from annexing Bosnia from the Ottomans in 1908, and that was the event that sparked Serbia's drive to expand its own territory. Its history of prior weakness meant that Russia's foreign policy makers feared that without some decisive action, Russia wouldn't be taken seriously anymore. In the wake of Austria's ultimatum, Russian Foreign Minister Sazonov concluded that Russia, quote, could not remain a passive spectator whilst the Slavonic people was being trampled down. If Russia failed to fulfill her historic mission, she would be considered a decadent state and would henceforth have to take second place among the powers. If, at this critical juncture, the Serbs were abandoned to their fate, Russian prestige in the Balkans would collapse utterly. Thanks, Thought Bubble. So judging from what we just learned in the Thought Bubble, it was really the Ottomans. If they could have just stopped Austria from annexing Bosnia in the first place, none of this would have happened. And if I may go a little further back, there wouldn't have even been an Ottoman Empire without the stupid Romans. And of course, the Roman Empire was largely dependent upon constant expansion and looting, so if only the Gauls could have defeated Caesar, none of this would have happened. In short, no wonder Caesar was assassinated. He was about to start World War I in 1900 years. I bring that up because that's the tricky thing about the blame game. You can trace the causes of World War I back a bunch of ways. I mean, I can't think of anyone who you can't at least partially assign blame to. Well, I mean, except for the Mongols. Actually, you know what? If they just kept control of Russia, probably no World War I. Anyway, all of this only scratches the surface of the arguments about who's to blame for World War I. I mean, I haven't dealt with stuff like the alliance system or European imperialism, or you often hear about the naval rivalry between Britain and Germany. And then there are the ideological causes like nationalism and the social Darwinist thinking that led people to believe that war was a natural and inevitable state of human affairs. You can tell all those origin stories of the Great War, and they're important, but ours centers on diplomatic history. There are a few reasons for this. First, the decision to go to war was ultimately in the hands of a very small group of diplomats. I mean, even in the most democratic countries, Britain and France, popular opinion didn't force mobilization. Also, in most countries, that's still the case. It's still diplomats who decide whether to go to war. So understanding what makes governments and diplomats decide to go to war is very important. But looking at the diplomatic causes of the war also reveals something to us about the pitfalls of writing history. I mean, diplomats are famous for keeping pretty detailed records of their dealings, both at the time and in retrospect. And then historians have to sift through all these sources and make choices about which ones to emphasize, and sometimes even which ones to believe, because of course often these sources are in direct conflict. Now, I'm no historian, but in creating this episode, we had to make choices that many of you will disagree with, either because you don't think we gave enough evidence or because you don't like the things that we emphasized, and that's great. It's these
Okay. Do you understand what is this man saying, Tuanan?
Okay.
Okay. Like how they write the history for World War One. Okay. This is already talking about who started the war, but how is it presented, right? Many people would try to understand that the war has started because it's the Germany,
Right.
but some people would say, even before Germany started the war, it's Russia who is already preparing and who is very
It's
um
Rasputin.
sorry,
Rasputin.
sorry.
I think it's a king, a Russia king, and Rasputin.
Okay. that person, right? It could be right. The Russians could be, right? So there are a lot of controversy. It depends who the one to write the history. Do you know historians? Historians. So historians the one who write history, right? Historians.
Historians.
Các nhà sử học.
So it depends on them who they emphasize, who they emphasize.
Emphasize.
Okay? They understand?
Yes.
Okay. So of course, if they emphasize someone, then they would likely to believe that one, right? Okay, I will give the video clips to you if you want to watch for another time, okay?
Yes.
And I will give some questions to you. All right? Okay, so we end our class today for that one. So you are very good in understanding the English language. Very good. So keep it up. You can watch a lot of this one in YouTube, definitely, so that your knowledge can expand. Okay, I will send the link to you. Then I will ask some questions. All right. Okay, thank you very much, Ang. Have a great day and weekend. Bye bye.